Hi, do you have a goal? Are you working towards that goal? How badly do you want to achieve it? I realized about 3 months ago that my big passion in life is making video games and animations. And this year, in 2026, I set some goals for myself. The first one is to finish making a full video game. The second one is to make one 2D and one 3D animation. Since setting these goals, I've been learning how to use Blender and Unity in my free time, following tutorials, taking online classes, and just experimenting with what I can do in the programs. And so far, I've made some really cool things. But lately, I kind of feel like I've lost the plot, as people say, because even though I have these firm goals, I'm not really working towards them in any direct way. But I want to get a little bit more serious. I want to challenge myself to do something big and actually finish it. And that's where my idea for this video came from. Basically, I feel like I've spent enough time beating around the bush. It's time for me to make my first video game. And to make sure that I actually get this done, I've set a firm deadline of 1 week. Yes, I am going to make a video game in 1 week. Today is Sunday, February 8th, and by next Sunday, I want my video game to be done. Just for a little background, I have never made a video game before. I just started learning Unity, so this is all going to be very new to me. I think this entire process is just going to be me learning on the spot and applying what I'm learning immediately to this game. So I'm definitely not going to make anything fancy. In fact, my big plan for this video game is basically to make the most basic version of skee-ball that you could think of. So I started the challenge by just planning everything out and then coming up with a very basic schedule for myself. Starting on Monday, tomorrow, I wanted to start with research and I wanted to make the basic meshes. I wanted to make the ramp and I wanted to make the balls. And then Tuesday, the idea was to set up the physics and the controls of the game. Wednesday is to figure out if I want any visual effects or make some sort of points system for the game. Thursday is to make a game menu. Friday is to add sound effects if I can and maybe write some music for it. And then the weekend I dedicate to testing because I'm sure I'm going to make a lot of mistakes and have to redo a bunch of stuff. So my big plan for this was just to model everything in Unity. But when I actually opened Unity and started making a new project, I sort of realized that you can't really model in the program. Again, I've basically never used Unity, so everything that I'm doing here is very new to me. But I was surprised. I kind of in my head thought Unity and Blender were much more similar than they are, but I'm realizing now that you really cannot model things in Unity. And I think to make anything more complicated than just like a basic geometric shape, you kind of need to know how to code. And if you couldn't guess, I have never done any C# coding in my life. Luckily for me, all I really need for my skee-ball game is a straight ramp and a ball, which can both be made using the default meshes in Unity. So after I set those up, I set up the basic physics of the objects so the ball and ramp would interact correctly. Basically, my goal for the game is for the player to be able to move the left and right keyboard keys to move the ball at the base of the ramp and then press the up key to shoot the ball up the ramp and maybe collect or hit different objects and hopefully score points. So it's a very simple idea and that's why these basic shapes are okay. The next thing I wanted to do was set up the game controls. So like I said, I don't know how to code, so I watched a bunch of tutorial videos about setting up movement controls in your game. So here you can see me basically just copying the code I got from videos, but sadly these codes didn't really end up having any effect on the ball, and it was just a bust. After the coding fail of day 1, I realized that, well, coding is a lot harder than I thought. I've done some Python coding in school, but at least in school I could ask my teachers for help, and here I'm truly on my own, and figuring this stuff out can be really hard. For days 2 and 3, I decided to work through the built-in Unity Essentials Pathway Learning Project tutorial because they have a whole section about coding. I had started the tutorial prior to doing this challenge, but I never finished it, so I wanted to focus on getting that done and seeing how much information I could just pull from that and put directly toward my game project. At this point, I was falling behind on my original challenge schedule, but there really was nothing else I could do. You can't make a video game in Unity without understanding how C# coding works, so this learning stage was incredibly important. After completing the programming tutorial, I finished a little quiz on the Unity site and felt it was time for me to go back to my game project and see if I could apply any of the C# scripts to my game. I got a bunch of error messages when I tried opening my game file, so I ended up starting from scratch, and this time I made the ball gold because it looks cool. And then I began the long and difficult journey of trying to get the ball to move. I spent day 4 trying to use code from the Unity programming tutorial to get the ball to move. And I actually succeeded, finally. However, the code from the Unity tutorial only lets your player move forward and backward. The left and right arrows let you turn, but they don't actually allow you to move to the left and to the right. So movement is always front and back. And the whole idea for my game is that the user can move the ball to the left and right, and the up arrow key will shoot the ball up the ramp. So figuring out how to put those nuances into my code was the next task. It seemed like all I needed to do was edit the code so that instead of moving forward and backward, the user moved left and right. But for some reason, getting this to work was really confusing. And unfortunately, I was unable to solve this problem on day 4, so it turned into a day 5 challenge. And considering that at this point, I had originally planned to be done with all the programming, plus visual effects, and a game menu, and a point system, and music, I had fallen quite far behind on the challenge. On day 5, my genius solution to the problem was to just move the camera so that even though technically the player is moving forward and backward, it would look like they were moving left and right. Pretty smart, right? I also added in the ramp, and I gave the ramp a rigid body physic and made sure it interacted correctly with the ball. And then I made a little collectible object at the top of the ramp that the player could try to hit. After that, it was time to take on the new challenge of getting the ball to shoot forward. This is different than just moving the ball forward in the same way you can move it to the left and right, because I want the player to be able to hit the up arrow key and feel like they're throwing the ball. But I couldn't figure out how to make that effect. I watched some YouTube tutorials about this, and from those videos, I actually learned how to set up real left and right player movement. So I made an entirely new, simplified script for that, and I figured out how to use what's called a force to push the ball forward when the up arrow key is pressed. And it actually worked. I was so happy when this finally worked. I had really felt like giving up at many points in this process, but I pushed through and I made actual working game mechanics, so I'm very pleased with that. I also wrote a script for the collectible object that would make it disappear when the ball touched it. And I gave the collectible a little explosion animation, which I thought was really fun, so it would look more satisfying when the player hit it. And for both of those things, I pretty much just copy-pasted a script from the Unity programming tutorial, so this didn't take me too long. But all in all, I'd say I ended day 5 on a high. Yeah, I was still behind on my original challenge schedule, but because of the success I had, I actually felt like I could still achieve everything I originally set out to achieve. And then day 6 happened, and all that changed. On day 6, the goal was to figure out a way to replace the ball at the bottom of the ramp after the player had already thrown it. I watched some more tutorial videos and learned about respawning objects, which seemed like the perfect route to take with this. You know, like in platform games, how if a player falls off a platform or touches an enemy, they will get sent back to the beginning of the level? Well, that's kind of the same logic I wanted to implement into my game. And that's why I created that big plane thing. When the player shoots the ball up the ramp and the ball collides with this wall, the respawn code should send the ball right back to the start. At least that's what I was hoping would happen. Besides making the wall there, I ended up setting up a respawn point, and everything seemed to be going pretty smoothly until this happened. And I think the issue here is that even though the ball did successfully respawn, the force that gets applied to it that makes it shoot forward isn't getting reset to 0, so the ball's position changes, but the force applied to it doesn't, which is why it gets stuck in this loop. I tried fixing the issue in the code, but I just couldn't figure out how, and yeah, that's when I started looking into instantiating as another option. Instantiating is what it's called when you basically create and destroy duplicate objects for the player to use, sort of like bullets coming out of a gun. And when I learned about this, I started to think about my game as sort of a shooter game, because after all, the player is just shooting a ball up a ramp, and just like if the player had some sort of weapon or gun, they'd need the gun to be reloaded so that they could continue shooting it. And there are a ton of Unity RPG tutorial videos, so I tried following along with some of them. Yeah, it didn't work. Seeing those balls explode like that was honestly kind of my final straw with this. I had no idea why that happened, and my brain was already sort of fried, and I just didn't have the energy to even attempt to fix it. And that's sort of the mindset I went into on day 7. Yes, day 7, February 22nd, exactly 7 days after I started the challenge on the 8th. Well, yeah, I actually stopped working on the challenge for about a week. I wouldn't say that I gave up on it because I always intended to get back to it, but I really just needed some time to mentally recover from the frustration that I felt. But after giving myself enough time to recuperate, I finally sat back down, I opened my Unity file, and I tried one more time to make this work. I ignored the whole instantiating idea and tried returning to my original respawning idea, since that did technically work. But instead of using a wall to trigger the respawn code, I thought I could try using a timer. With the timer, I could say, once the player presses the up arrow key and shoots the ball up the ramp, you should wait 2 seconds and then trigger the respawn code. I saw someone doing this technique in a Unity RPG tutorial video, so I was feeling pretty confident this time. And yeah, I give up. So, could I make a video game in 1 week? No. Maybe if I sat at my desk the whole rest of the day and tried working on this for hours and hours, I could figure out how to make the respawn thing work, but I just don't have it in me. I basically rage quitted this challenge numerous times because I just kept getting stuck, and I have nobody to ask for help. I'm definitely going to consider posting more on Unity question boards and stuff, but they don't give immediate answers, and I'm kind of realizing that my hobby of making a video game by myself is extremely isolated. And it 100% depends on my ability to self-teach and research and learn things on my own. And it makes this whole thing a lot harder, I think, than, for example, if I was studying game development in school and had like professors or peers that I could talk to. But that being said, even though this challenge was really frustrating and annoying at times, it was actually really rewarding too. When the ball finally shot up the ramp and collected that red thing and it, exploded, I was so happy because that was actually hours of work that finally came to fruition, and I got to see an idea of mine come to life on my screen, which was really awesome. And technically, shooting a ball up a ramp and collecting an object is a game. Is it a fun game? Not really. Does it have all of the aspects that I originally wanted to put into it, like a point system, a game menu, music? No, it doesn't have any of that, but it's still a game. So, in a way, maybe I did achieve my goal, but even for me, I think that's a little bit of a stretch. Ultimately, I did bite off way more than I could chew with this challenge. It was actually my first time ever programming in C#, and it was actually my first time working in Unity outside of the Unity tutorial. And knowing that, I feel like I do have a lot to be proud of. Even though I didn't really achieve what I set out to do, I still did something, and that something is probably not what I could have accomplished if I hadn't done this challenge. Because if it wasn't for this challenge, I would have given up way sooner. So I'm glad I stuck with it at least this long. This upcoming week, I would love to keep working on this game and maybe actually figure out how to make the player object respawn. I really don't know why it's so difficult, but it is. I would also love to get back into Blender because of this challenge, I haven't really worked on Blender much, so I'd like to get back into it and maybe start working on new models or maybe go back to my diner model. I'm not really sure, but I would like to get back to Blender a little bit. About this challenge though, I'm sorry if the results were not that exciting. It is really basic, probably one of the most basic games a person can make in Unity, but it's definitely a start. So if you have a passion or a project that you're working on, maybe you can try to push yourself a little bit with it this week too. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. This challenge was such a struggle for me. I got so annoyed, but I'm happy I got through it, at least this far. I am gonna keep working on it, and maybe I'll make another video about it soon, I hope. I hope you found this entertaining or interesting, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.